What's going on, Blazer fans? It's Tori here with Eric Brandt, and we have your Eastern Conference preview. Now, we did our Western Conference preview on Friday. If you want to watch that, go check it out. Today, we're doing our Eastern Conference. We're going to try and make it a little bit shorter than last time, so we're going to have a very short intro. We're literally going to jump straight into it. Nothing special. We're going straight into your 15th ranked team, Eric.
So this is going to be the worst team in the NBA, in my opinion, and that's the Charlotte Hornets. Last year, they won 39 games. They lost their best player, Kemba Walker. They replaced him with Terry Rozier, which is a major downgrade. I'm a little higher on him than you are, but still not great as a starting point guard. Wasn't a big fan of their draft. PJ Washington's okay. He does have some potential, but I don't know. You already drafted Bridges last year. Is it really that good of a fit? They're kind of similar body types. And then Cody Martin at 36 was just ridiculous. He should have been an undrafted player. They'll have a lot of money off the books after this year, but they're really going to struggle this year without Kemba. And just looking at that roster, it's terrible, and I don't expect them to win more than 20 games this year.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, man, and Terry Rozier might be the best player on that team, and I'm not high on him at all. He can't shoot over 40% from the field, and he's not an efficient three-point shooter. He's not impressive defensively, not an impressive playmaker. He got severely overpaid. He's going to be one of the worst contracts in the NBA over the next 3 years. I wouldn't say he's any better than Ricky Rubio, and he got paid what Ricky Rubio got paid, and we were calling Ricky Rubio a huge overpay. Terry Rozier is even worse, in my opinion. Then again, they are kind of banking on some upside, which he might have a little bit more upside than Ricky Rubio, but I'm just not high on Terry Rozier. They're going to be interesting to watch because they got a lot of young guys. I put Dwayne Bacon on the bench list. He'll be interesting to watch. Malik Monk, we'll see if he can finally pull it together. Miles Bridges. But outside of that, outside their fun young talent, there's no other reason to watch the Charlotte Hornets. They're going to be awful. So moving on to team number 14, we have
the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yes, sir.
And last year they won 19 games. I don't expect them to be much better this year. Obviously, if they keep Kevin Love the whole year and he's healthier, then I think he played like 22 games last year or something. So they would have his presence a little bit, but that team isn't going anywhere anytime soon. They drafted Darius Garland, who we talked about before, could have a little bit of a Damian Lillard type rookie year. But they also drafted Sexton the year before, and they played the same position. So how much are they going to fight over who has the ball in their hands?
Yeah, apparently they're trying to do some Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum type of thing. That's what Tristan Thompson was quoted as saying. But both those guys are smaller than Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum.
Yeah, and you don't know if neither of them can really. Well, I guess Garland could probably play off the ball a little bit, but Sexton for sure couldn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, the jury's still out on that. Wasn't a huge fan of Dylan Windler there either, that they got in the draft. He's probably would be an okay role player on a good team, but I don't know about a rebuilding team.
Yeah.
Kevin Porter has obviously some potential. Could be a good scorer for them if he develops, but they're going to compete with the Hornets for a worst team in the NBA probably.
Oh, for sure. And outside of Garland, Sexton, Osman, who I have as their starting point guard, shooting guard, small forward, when I'm looking at the rest of the rotation, assuming that Windler and Kevin Porter don't play all that much, they have a lot of veteran guys for how bad they are. You're looking at Kevin Love, Thompson, Dellavedova, Clarkson, Brandon Knight, Larry Nance Jr., John Henson. They have a lot of guys that are going to play minutes that aren't a long-term fit in their future. So I expect them to possibly move on from some of those guys, trade some of them on, and Kevin Love especially, I think they'll decide to move him at some point. All right, so before we hop into our 13th team, I'm sorry if that intro was a little laggy. I was recording in 1080p. I got to do it in 720p because I don't got the computer to handle 1080p. So I can't do that, super nice high res for you guys just yet, but hopefully in the future we can get things crystal clear. So anyway, moving on to your 13th team, who do you have, Eric?
I have the Washington Wizards, and just a side note, I don't think anyone wants to see my face in 1080p anyway, so we're good there. So the Wizards are going to be bad too. Outside of Beal, they really don't have much that's going to help them this year. They do have some guys of potential for the future, but not enough to keep them in the playoff race or anything like that. And if they trade Beal or Beal gets injured or is frustrated with the situation, they're going to really be bad. And I think one of their problems is they got basically nothing for Otto Porter last year when they traded him. They got two guys that left in the offseason. They didn't even keep Portis, who was part of that deal as a restricted free agent. But yeah, Hachimura, Wagner, and Troy Brown are going to have to really step up their games in order for this team to even be in the like mid-20s in wins, I think.
Yeah, I forgot to put Troy Brown Jr. on the bench because he's definitely a part of their future. I like Wagner too. I think it's pronounced Wagner because he's German. But he's a guy I like coming out of the draft. They do have a lot of young talent I like. I'm a Hachimura fan because I'm a Gonzaga fan. Thomas Bryant, I like him too. It will be interesting to see if Isaiah Thomas can kind of get his career back on track after the past couple years. So there is some interesting developmental storylines there, but from a talent standpoint, they suck. Their bench might be historically bad. Their sixth man is Ish Smith. Their seventh man is CJ Miles, who was horrible last year. Like, their bench is horrible.
Actually, I heard Ish Smith might be starting next to Fields.
Isaiah is hurt for the first like month or two. So at the start of the season, their sixth man is Mahinmi, CJ Miles, Troy Brown, Wagner, Schofield. Like, that's a very bad bench. That's going to be a historically bad bench. I can't wait till we play the Wizards and we can play that bench because Anthony Simons is about to drop 50 on their heads.
For sure.
So 12th team, who you got?
I have the New York Knicks, and this is a team that had a disastrous offseason. Obviously, they traded Porzingis and cleared all that cap space to make a run at Durant and Kyrie this summer. They didn't get them, and not only did they not get those two, but they really failed to get anyone of significance.
Yeah, let me just say this, though. Julius Randle, they did get with that cap space. He's not that much worse than Porzingis. He's not as good as Porzingis, but for a consolation prize, it's not terrible.
Yeah, I don't know about that. He's, I mean, he's never really played on a good team. I mean, he's put up stats on bad teams. Yeah, we'll see. The jury's kind of out.
Wouldn't the same be said for Porzingis as well, though?
Well, yeah, but Randall's, I guess they both played in 4 years now, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, the same draft. But so signing Julius Randle was fine, I guess, but what I didn't get was signing like 8 power forwards other than him too. So they signed, that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but they signed Bobby Portis, Marcus Morris, and Taj Gibson, and they already had Mitchell Robinson. It's just too many guys, I think, and they all kind of do similar stuff.
Yeah, I'll say I had trouble filling out this bench unit with like 10 or with 5 guys for the bench because there's like 8 or 9 guys. There's like Alonzo Trier's missing, Wayne Ellington is missing, Reggie Bullock is missing. There's so many guys to fill out. With the Wizards, their bench was so bad, it was hard to find 5 guys. The Knicks was the opposite problem. They got a bunch of solid role players.
And I thought Dennis Smith Jr. played okay once he got traded there, got more of a situation where he can be the man. Which I think is going to be what it takes for him to succeed. He needs to improve his shooting this year. If he does that, he can still be a pretty good player in this league, I think. I'm not super high on Kevin Knox or Frank the Tank, but
they don't have Frank's. You talking about Kaminsky?
No, sorry, Frank Kalina. I never know how to pronounce his last name.
Ntilikina. Yeah, I don't even have him listed. Frank. Is that his nickname? Is it Frank the Tank?
I don't know. I just call everyone Frank.
I thought that was Kaminsky. Every Frank is a tank. Gotcha. Yep. I'll just say this. I think they're better than the 3 teams you had below them because their bench is actually good. Like, that bench should be good. And then they still have some decent talent in their starting lineup. A lot of young guys. They got 5 young guys, basically. And if they can exceed expectations a little bit, maybe New York could get kind of interesting in a weak in Eastern Conference.
And I love Mitchell Robinson. I think he's going to be a really solid big.
Yeah. Him, Randall, Knox, Barrett, Dennis Smith Jr., that starting lineup could be very, very bad. Or if they all develop nicely, that lineup could actually be solid to go along with a decent bench. I mean, if everything breaks right for the Knicks, you could maybe see them pushing an 8th seed as a surprise team, kind of like the Magic did last year. I wouldn't say that about the 3 teams below them, though. So anyway, Who is your 11th ranked team?
The Chicago Bulls. I kind of like what they're doing, but kind of don't like what they're doing at the same time. I do. I'm pretty high on that Markkanen and Wendell Carter front court. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be pretty solid for years, and you got some shooting there. Um, their guards are, I mean, like Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine, and they drafted Kobe White.
I have their starting point guard as Saturansky.
Yeah, he's more like a point forward type.
Yeah.
But yeah, he can definitely handle the ball, and I think that was their best pickup of the summer. Not sure why they got Thaddeus Young when they have all those young bigs. Like they paid him like a three years, pretty big amount of money. And I don't know about Kobe White yet. I'm not super high on him either, but he could develop. I don't know. What do you think of Kobe White?
I don't know, man. I wasn't super high on him when he came out of the draft, but I think he's in a solid position. He has a lot of offensive talent around him, and he'll also be given the role right away to succeed. He definitely has talent. He definitely has a wide variety of different scoring moves. It's just kind of improving his defense, improving his court presence, improving his playmaking, and I think those things will kind of decide him as a player. It'll make the difference between him being a do-it-all point guard and just a scorer, sixth-man version off the bench.
And there was a point last year where they were basically playing a G League roster.
Oh yeah,
they had all their main guys were out. So if they have that happen again, obviously they could be back towards the bottom of the East. But if all those guys play this year and they're healthy, they have enough talent to be kind of on that fringe playoff roster or playoff outlook.
Yeah. I mean, as long as their roster doesn't look like a hospital patient list, then because that's what it looked like last year. It was bad. It was bad. So Bulls could be interesting. They have a lot of talent, but they're probably still not there to make it into the playoffs just yet. Moving on to your 10th ranked team.
The Atlanta Hawks. Now, this is a team that added some major wing talent in the offseason with both DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish. Pretty solid draft for them. They also got Bruno Fernando, who could be a solid center for them. They got a lot of weird players though too. They took on a bunch of contracts. They got like Alan Crabb, Evan Turner, Chandler Parsons, just like a list of like crappy wings. Jabari Parker too.
Yeah.
Those none of those guys really fit into what's going on. So it'll be interesting to see how much those guys play versus just turning it over to their young roster. Because if you look at a roster with like Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, John Collins, and the two rookies, or three if you include Bruno, that's a pretty strong core. I don't know if it's as strong as if they would have had Doncic instead of Trae Young because they traded him. But I think they're pretty much 1 year away from being a solid playoff team. I think they'll kind of struggle a little bit being so young this year. They could mix in those veterans, but those veterans aren't good enough probably to catapult the young guys up this year. But that's definitely a team you got to watch out for in the future.
Oh yeah, I love their core. Herter is going to be a breakout player this next season. Trae Young, if he replicates the second half of last season, then I think he'll actually be an all-star in the Eastern Conference. He doesn't have much competition there, and his numbers were killer at the end of last season. Really like their young core. You had Reddish, Collins, Hunter, Herter, Young, all in 3 years. For those 5 in the past 2 years. That's actually very, very impressive. And then once those contracts come off the books that they took on this past summer, when you were looking at next offseason, they have a ton of cap space. There's not many players in the market. They could be a sneaky destination for some good free agents. And if you add good free agents to that developing core, then that could be a very, very solid team next season. This season, though, I agree with you. They're probably not ready to make the playoffs. Moving on to your 9th team.
So here's where it gets really tough. So I have about 5 or 6 teams that I all see winning between about 40 and 46 games. And so I had to bump one of them out. And I'm just rolling with this team being super overhyped. And I'm just going to go with a bold prediction here that the Nets will finish 9th and not make the playoffs. And we've talked about this a little bit with Kyrie. But I just, like before LeBron came back to the Cavs, they were terrible. He goes to the Celtics, he gets hurt, and they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then he comes back, and they have all these expectations, and they weren't that great last year compared to how they should have been. So I don't know if he can carry a team much better than D'Angelo Russell did. It's not that huge of an upgrade, in my opinion. And I think you've shared that same sentiment as well.
Yep.
So they won 42 games last year. I just don't see them being that much better. They did have some injuries with LeVert and Dinwiddie. I think were both hurt for a part of last year. But I just don't see them getting too much better than that 42 wins, other than the East is terrible. So they'll probably pick up some wins that just because of that. But I think they're going to be in that dogfight for the last playoff spot.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the Brooklyn Nets, man. Because I feel like I should be disagreeing with having the Brooklyn Nets outside of the playoff picture, but I can't just say that I 100% disagree with that, because there are some valid concerns. You look at the asterisks on the Brooklyn Nets slide right there. Kurucs and Wilson Chandler. Kurucs hasn't been suspended yet, but I'm kind of expecting something to happen because he got arrested for domestic violence in his home country. That will carry over to the NBA. And then you have Wilson Chandler suspended 25 games. They don't have options at that power forward spot. You're looking at Taurean Prince, maybe even Joe Harris, who's a little bit burly guy. I have them as their starting shooting guard, but it's just hard to figure out who's going to slot in at that fourth spot. They're going to be very, very undersized. Jared Allen and DeAndre Jordan can't really play together, so maybe they try and make those two work, but there'll be problems there. So, yeah, there's some concerns. Kyrie's leadership, as you said, so I understand why you'd have them outside the playoff. I do think they're a bit overhyped. If they had KD, completely different story, but they don't. They don't for this entire regular season, so I can't say that I 100% disagree with that. Moving on to number 8, we have
the Miami Heats. So last year they were just on the outside of the playoff race, and they lost Dwayne Wade. Obviously, Hassan Whiteside's with us now, and they also traded Josh Richardson to get Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is a really good player. I think he will be better than he was on Philly last year because he tends to, I think, in my opinion, he's better when he's the main guy on a team. And not having to like share with Cat or, Embiid or whoever. I don't think he's great off the ball. And Simmons last year should have had the ball in his hands more. But I think he's going to be just good enough to sneak them into the playoffs and as the 8th seed. I don't really know about some of their other moves. They have Myers Leonard now. They drafted Harrow in the draft. And they also got KZ Okpala, so they got some solid wings to go along with what they had already. They got Bam and Kelly Olynyk up front, which I think is a pretty solid. Well, if you include Myers, I guess it kind of downgrades a little bit depending on how he does. But those two are pretty solid, and they got James Johnson to back up at the 4. If he gets in shape, because he reported to camp way out of shape.
Did he really? That doesn't really surprise me.
He failed his conditioning and they sent him home or something, some contract clause. But I think they have just enough, as long as Butler makes it through the season, to sneak into the playoffs.
Yeah, this team is built to run and gun. You have so many playmakers on this roster. Dragic, Butler, Justice Winslow. Olynyk is a solid passer and can handle the ball a bit for a 7-footer. James Johnson off the bench, even if he's 50 pounds heavier, he's still a power forward that can kind of handle the ball and make plays a little bit as well. So I expect this team to play very, very fast. You got a lot of players that love playing in transition. Dragic, Winslow, Derrick Jones Jr. is super athletic. James Johnson loves to push the ball. So I'm expecting them to play fast. Jimmy Butler is a little bit of a weird fit, though, in my opinion, because he's more of a guy who likes to slow it down. It kind of goes against what a lot of the other players on that roster like to do. So I'm really curious to see how much they push the ball and if Jimmy Butler kind of slows things down too much, which could hurt that roster because, in my opinion, they're built to run. Moving on to your 7th team.
I have the Orlando Magic at 7. It's a team that won 42 games last year. We talked about them a little bit in our over-unders. I just think at worst they're going to be about the same as last year. They have some potential pop with Jonathan Isaac and Mo Bamba potentially getting better this year. Aaron Gordon's still young enough to improve a little bit, even though neither of us are super high on him. But I just think worst case scenario, they're going to be about a 500 team and should easily make the playoffs in the East. Markelle Fultz is just a bonus, in my opinion. I know you're going to say that he downgrades them a little bit if he struggles, and especially if they feed him minutes. But I just think whatever he gives them is a bonus, and they won't risk missing the playoffs in order to develop him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like Markelle Fultz for this team, though, because if he's not able to shoot the ball, they don't play him. They're fine. They barely gave up anything to acquire him. But if he does end up kind of scratching the surface of his talent level, if he's able to finally figure out his shot, finally get healthy, then he raises the ceiling of this team. I'm really high on Jonathan Isaac going into this year. He seems like he's destined to break out. He's been a defensive player that's had flashes of brilliance in his offensive game. Maybe brilliance is a bit of an overstatement, but if you look at a guy like Pascal Siakam going into last season, Jonathan Isaac seems to have a few of the same traits, and he's definitely in a position on a team where there will be touches to be had after Vucevic, because Vucevic is definitely number one player on that team, just like Kawhi was for Toronto, but that number two scoring role is kind of up in the air. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jonathan Isaac does this year. I think he could be one of the top candidates for most improved. Mohamed Bamba's trapped behind Vucevic. That's another guy I like, but he's not going to get enough time. So they do have some good young talent. The roster makeup is kind of weird. They got 3 good centers, in my opinion, because I'm also high on Khem Birch. But he's probably not going to be able to get minutes with this roster. So adding Aminu was strange as well. Behind Aaron Gordon, I assume one of those guys is going to play a little bit of power forward, which is kind of strange. Their best position is definitely power forward. So we'll see how this sorts itself out. We'll see if the Magic overachieved last year or if they're actually a true playoff team. I would put them kind of in this group of teams you have around here as well. Moving on to your 6th ranked team.
So 6 is the Detroit Pistons. Mm-hmm. And we've also talked about them a little bit. They added some okay vets in Derrick Rose, Markieff Morris, Joe Johnson if he makes the team. Our old boy Tim Frazier, Tony Snell. So they got some dudes. They drafted Doumbia and Servetus in the draft, who I thought was both those picks were pretty good value, but I don't know how much those two are going to help this year. I think those are more future picks. But the big question with them is just if Blake Griffin stays healthy. If he does, I think they could be even higher than 6, potentially jump ahead of the Pacers and the Raptors. But I wasn't bold enough to predict that he could be healthy for the full season. But, anytime you have bigs like Griffin and Drummond, and they have some shooting with like Luke Kennard, and Reggie Jackson was hurt for a lot last year too. So if he stays healthy, they have a decent enough team to be in this range, I think.
Yeah, I agree with your sentiments 100%. I actually have a question for you. Would you start Jackson and Rose together, or would you bring one of those off the bench?
I would probably, at this point in his career, bring Rose as like a 6th man off the bench. And Reggie Jackson's okay, but he does struggle sometimes. So in those games, you just swap him out and let Rose take over,
Yeah.
But I'd like to just turn Rose loose in the second unit and just let him be himself. And I feel like in the starting unit, he'd have to kind of play more through the bigs, and that's not really his game.
Yeah, I agree. You already have 3 players that are kind of ball dominant in that starting lineup. And I wouldn't say Drummond's ball dominant, but you got 3 offensive options that need the ball in their hands. I like Bruce Brown as that starting shooting guard just to provide a defender out there, and hopefully his shooting improves because they definitely need more floor spacing. I like Brown and Snell as their starting wings. Hopefully both those guys can be like 3-and-D type of players. Moving on to your 5th team, who do you got?
5th, I have the Toronto Raptors, and they're going to take a bit of a step back from last year. Not only did they lose Kawhi, but losing Danny Green and not replacing him too, I think is going to be a major problem. They do still have Siakam, obviously. He's going to potentially even take a bigger jump than he took last year. Not necessarily number-wise, but like in terms of role, having to be the star of the team. They still have Gasol and Lowry, quality vets. you don't know how much they have left in the tank after a long playoff run, but they could be interesting if they struggle. A team that moves on and goes for a youth movement now that they won a title. But they replaced their wings with Stanley Johnson and Rondé Hollis Jefferson, who I'm not high on either of those guys.
Yeah.
They're both defensive guys who can't shoot at all, and who aren't like that good at defense either.
Yeah, after their top 7, man, this team doesn't have any depth.
They got OG. He didn't really play much last year with Kawhi being on the team, but
yeah, I assume he's going to start.
Yeah, he's someone who can maybe fill in for those guys, but he could also end up being like Stanley Johnson, where he doesn't ever develop a shot enough to play quality minutes.
Yeah.
But he's still a guy who has potential. So if he gives them a little bit of a jump, like a Siakam type jump from last year, then they could really stay in that playoff mix for a top seed. But other than that, just solid playoff team, but not enough to get home court advantage, I think.
So, not to put you on the spot, but you had them as under 45 wins in our first podcast. You have
47.
You have them.
It was 47.
I thought it was 45. Maybe it was 47.
Oh no, the Nets
was 40.
were 47. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 45. So you think they get the 5th seed, winning less than 45 games?
I think, like I just said, a lot of these teams are going to be in that 40 to 45 win range. So
yeah.
I think, like I know you're not going to agree with me, but I think they're one of those teams that could finish anywhere from this position to 9th, like the Nets. Like I had the Nets. So.
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't agree with that, but yeah, it would be interesting to see them get 5th with like 44 wins like the Blazers did the year after Aldridge. So last question on the Raptors. Who do you start at shooting guard?
Probably Powell, Norman Powell.
You bring Van Vliet off the bench?
Yeah. I don't know about Van Vliet and Lowry playing together as much. I know they did a little bit in the playoffs, but yeah, I think I'd start Powell and just see if he can, because it was weird. He was like really good early in his career, and then he got that big contract, and then he really struggled for like a year, and most of last year I didn't really even hear from him much, and then he kind of had a few good playoff games or moments in the playoffs. So maybe just getting the people, like it's kind of like what the Blazers do sometimes, and just clear out the people in front of him and let him sink or swim. So that might be good for him, but yeah, I'd probably just throw him in there and see what he has.
Yeah.
Start him, Lowry, OG, Siakam, and Gasol. I think that's pretty good.
I know this is going against kind of what I did with the Pistons, but I'd start Van Vliet. I'd give him a big role, see what he can do, see if he can kind of expand on what he did in the postseason, and just see how that works. You got some smaller 2 guards starting in the league now. You look at the Cavs, you look at maybe the Pistons starting both Rose and Jackson. So I just do it just to see how it looks. Moving on to your 4th ranked team.
I have the Indiana Pacers. Now, this is a team that Bose and I talked off the air about, but I'm just worried about Oladipo not getting back anytime soon. They're now saying it might be till beginning of January when he's back. I think if he was healthy at the beginning of this year, they would probably be up in that 3rd range. But yeah, I just can't put them that high. I like their team, their roster and stuff. It's just I'm kind of worried that they don't have that go-to guy. And they have a lot of players who have been decent as role players, but I don't know about now that without Oladipo, like they have to step up and become the man. And I'm not sure if any of them are going to do that. They potentially could. Guy like Malcolm Brogdon was a huge pickup for them. He just hasn't had to be the guy on his team before.
Yeah, I think without Oladipo, they have enough talent to get it done by committee. You're probably looking at Jeremy Lamb starting that shooting guard spot when you have Brogdon, Jeremy Lamb, TJ Warren, and then Sabonis is an efficient scorer who can post up in the low post as well. I think that you do have enough guys that can kind of get their own shot in certain areas that you could kind of get by without having that star level go-to player that you just feed the ball to in crunch time. I actually really like this team. It's the most underrated team in the Eastern Conference. They're always underrated. It actually reminds me a lot of our Portland Trail Blazers with how frequently they're underrated. Malcolm Brogdon was a huge pickup. He saved their offseason because they lost Thad Young, they lost Bogdanovich, they lost a lot of talent from that team. But Malcolm Brogdon, I think, is better than any of the guys they lost. I'm really high on Malcolm Brogdon. I think he had a 50, 40, 90 season last year, and if he didn't, it was something close to that. He was crazily efficient. I think now without Oladipo, he'll get a chance to be the number one scoring option on a team, and I actually think that he'll be able to average over 20 points per game this season. I think he's another candidate for most improved. You just look at his efficiency. Obviously, that'll drop a little bit if he's taking more shots and he's has more responsibility in the offense, but I still think he'll be an efficient scorer, getting something around 20, 21 points per game, and that'll be huge for them in their starting point guard. And then once Oladipo gets back, those two in the backcourt, they would probably just share ball handling duties. I don't think any one of them would be like a de facto point guard. They'd both bring the ball up, and that could be hard for a defense to game plan for. So I actually really like this roster makeup. I think once Oladipo gets back, they could actually be a dark horse candidate to go to the NBA Finals. Moving on to your third team.
I have the Boston Celtics. So the Celtics, I think their undoing is going to be their lack of bigs. They got Cantor to replace Horford, which isn't an upgrade at all. I agree with them probably not paying Horford this offseason, but they didn't really, other than Cantor, they didn't really do a lot to shore up that front line. So if Cantor gets hurt or he's struggling or anything, it's going to be tough for them to fill that role.
Yeah, they'd need Robert Williams to come through and take that next step because he's a guy that could be a good defensive rim protecting center for them, which Cantor is not. But Williams is still young. He's still unproven. We still have yet to see what he can be.
And I actually love swapping Kyrie for Kemba. I think that's going to pay dividends for them, and I think Kemba's a much better leader. I think he fits in with Tatum and Jaylen Brown and those guys way better. And I'm excited to see what that switch will do. I guess we saw it a little bit in the World Cup. I wasn't a fan of their draft despite how many picks they had. Romeo Langford's okay, but he's not like a great shooter. And like I said, they have all kinds of wing depth right now, so it's just a matter of how much he gets to play.
Yeah.
Thought they kind of went too high on Grant Williams.
Yeah. Me and you aren't high on him. Me and you aren't high on him at all. He could be a decent role player, but I just wanted to get to Carson Edwards. I am high on him. I think he could be their backup point guard behind Kemba. I don't like Marcus Smart at backup point guard, so I just wanted to say before you got to Carson Edwards, do you actually like him as a potential backup point guard behind Kemba, maybe playing like 12 to 15 minutes per game?
Yeah, he seems like one of those who can find a niche in the NBA, just like a scorer off the bench type. I don't know if he'll ever be anything more than that, but yeah, backing up a guy like Kemba, I think he'll be fine. On a championship team, they'll probably just make Smart the de facto point guard in the back in the second unit. Even though you don't like that, that's probably what they'll end up doing, just because they don't trust a rookie in the first, like in a playoff race. But I mean, that guy can flat out score. So.
Oh, I know. I watch a lot of Washington Husky basketball, so I watched Isaiah Thomas in college. Seeing what Isaiah Thomas was in college compared to what Carson Edwards was in college, and then seeing what Brad Stevens turned Isaiah Thomas into, it almost gets me thinking, man, like down the road, you know, if Kemba like leaves or declines or something happens, they rebuild, or, you know, Carson Edwards gets the opportunity to start for Brad Stevens, I feel like Brad Stevens could turn Carson Edwards into a guy dropping 20 points per game because of how much talent he has scoring the ball. I feel like it could be like an Isaiah Thomas 2.0 guy drafted in the second round, undersized guy, but he can score the lights out, and then all of a sudden he becomes a really, really good player. I don't know.
And that's got to be why they drafted him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to it seems weird because the Celtics were in a position where they should have been competing for a championship like Toronto did last year, but it seems weird to say that I liked what they did even though they lost guys like Kyrie and Al Horford, but I kind of like that they went more towards their young guys, because I think those young guys, we're both really, really high on Jason Tatum, I think. I still think he's going to break out sooner or later. And he's still pretty good even now, but he still has another gear, I think, in the NBA.
Yeah, I'm not too high on Ennis Cantor for them though, because Jason Tatum's probably going to be that starting power forward. It would have been nice to pair him with a rim protector, because otherwise, with Jason Tatum and Ennis Cantor as your starting 4 and 5, that rim protection is going to be non-existent. Their interior defense is going to be possibly the softest in the entire league. I would have rather seen Willie Cauley-Stein or somebody like that, Nerlens Noel, somebody that can protect the rim next to Jason Tatum, would have made a lot more sense than another scorer in that starting lineup who can't protect the rim, which is what Ennis Cantor is. So I wasn't all that high on that pickup.
They could have done both too, because Cauley-Stein signed for the minimum, so they still had some money. They could have signed both of them.
I mean, they signed Cantor for $5 million. If you toss Willie Cauley-Stein $5 million, he's taking that, and he's your starting center.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
So anyway, we just talked about some soft front court defense, and now we're talking about possibly the best defensive front court pairing in the league, which is Al Horford and Joel Embiid. The Philadelphia 76ers are your second team, and those two together, that's going to be scary.
Yeah, the only thing that worries me about them is against quicker teams, those two might have a little bit of trouble. But yeah, just on paper, that's scary good. And then you got Tobias Harris isn't bad at the 3 too. I kind of like Tobias playing more of a 4 than a 3, but keeping him was big for them. Ben Simmons just measured at like 6'9.5" without shoes, which is crazy for how good a ball handler he is. He obviously needs to develop a jump shot, but I think not having Butler on that team will allow him to go back to being himself a little bit. Their shooting, losing Redick might be an issue at some point. But this team's pretty loaded.
Oh, dude. I just look at their starting lineup and how big it is and how many of those guys are solid to good defenders. Their half-court defense is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be phenomenally good. I think that the Portland Trailblazers, a team like that, is going to struggle with a team like the Philadelphia 76ers. I know we had a lot of success with them last season. We blew them out twice. But a team that likes to play in the half court is going to have problems against the Philadelphia 76ers. You're going to have to be able to run and get them out in transition, beat Embiid and Horford down the court in order to have success offensively against them. If you're going to have half court success, you're going to have to hit a lot of difficult shots because these guys cover a lot of ground with their length. Now, I don't think their bench is that good, but that's another story.
Questionable. Bench is definitely questionable. You got some young guys that were drafted a couple years ago, like Zaire Smith and Jonah Bolden and stuff. If they take the next step, they could possibly be okay on the bench. But yeah, that's their biggest weakness. And then one other thing about the starting lineup is Josh Richardson, I think, is a better fit in that lineup than Jimmy Butler was, because he's a little better shooter and just as good a defender, in my opinion.
Oh, he's a lockdown guy. You're talking about just matching him up with our Portland Trailblazers, man. You're talking about Josh Richardson, a lockdown perimeter defender to put on C.J. McCollum or Damian Lillard, and then you put Ben Simmons and his length and athleticism on the other one, and that's going to be a very tough matchup. Any team kind of built like us, any team that needs to rely on their backcourt is going to have fits against the backcourt of Ben Simmons and Josh Richardson. So I agree with having them second. I also agree with your number 1 team, which is the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yes. So last year they won 60 games. I think losing Brogdon, and they traded for Mirotic halfway through last season. And he didn't really do a lot for them, but just not having either of those guys, I think, will hurt their shooting. They did add Korver, who's 37, 38, somewhere like that. They got former Blazer Robin Lopez and Wes Matthews. So those guys will provide some depth. But they didn't really do anything to cover for the loss of Brogdon. So that worries me a lot. But they're so good, and the East is so bad that I don't think they're going to slip much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they were equipped to handle the loss of Brogdon because they had George Hill and they brought him back, and that's going to be their secondary, or that's going to be their ball handler off the bench, which is the role that Brogdon filled before Hill got there. And then Wesley Matthews, I think that pickup was huge because he fits in perfectly with what they want to do, which is surround Giannis with guys that can shoot and guys that can defend. So I think Matthews' fit in that lineup makes a lot of sense. Can guard 2 or 3. Same with Chris Middleton. They got a really strong lineup. Matthews, Bledsoe, Antetokounmpo, Lopez, those are all like strong guys.
Keeping Brook was huge for them too, because they were worried about because he signed a mid or the biannual exception the year before, and they didn't have his bird rights. So trading Brogdon actually gave them the money to keep him, and that was pretty big because he had a huge year for them.
Yeah, it was something they had to do, and when you're trying to surround a guy like Giannis with a bunch of shooters, it's really hard to find a guy like Brook Lopez who can shoot the 3 ball on volume that efficiently. So he was integral to what they do because not only is he a great 3-point shooter, but he's also a really good rim protector to put next to Giannis. Brook Lopez was never a good defender earlier in his career, was never a 3-point shooter. He was a low post scorer who didn't really defend. He was kind of like an Enes Kanter type. Now he's a 3-and-D starting center, and I really like his game. And then off the bench, they got a lot of vets. You got Hill, you got former Blazer Pat Connaughton as well. So we got 3 former Blazers. You got Corver, Ilyasova, Robin Lopez, guys that just know how to play the game. I like the way their skill sets mesh with the starters and with each other with that bench unit. So I think that Mike Budenholzer will have a lot of different options for lineups that he can throw out there, and I think he'll be able to be creative and throw different looks at teams, and I think that will keep teams off balance, off kilter. And then Mike Budenholzer, I think he's probably the best coach in the Eastern Conference. I'm super high on Coach Bud. He's a guy that's going to get this team playing well once again this next season. So I'm also very high on the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yep. It should. I don't know about they could be hungry coming off that loss in the Eastern Conference Finals too, when everyone thought they were going to potentially take down the Warriors. But yeah, they had a really good regular season last year. I don't expect much different this year.
100% agree. So anyway, that does it for our Eastern Conference preview. Let me know if you agree or disagree with Eric's ratings. I'm going to have my standings predictions out in the future, so you guys can just hold off till then, and I'll have my 1 through 15th ranked lists for the Eastern and Western Conference. I'm looking forward to putting that out. And I think that's a wrap for me and Eric. We'll see you guys later. Peace out. Go Blazers.